Babysitters, what was the craziest family you babysat for? Part 2. Story 1. About 6 years ago, I occasionally cared for a young girl for a former high school acquaintance. She also had a son, but I didn't provide care for him. When the girl was around 6 months old, her mother contacted me, very upset, saying her daughter had a brain abnormality and a rare heart condition. Up until that point, the girl appeared to be developing normally. It was interesting to note that whenever my own son, who has special needs, experienced a medical incident, her daughter would suddenly have similar symptoms. I suspected the mother might have been exaggerating or fabricating her daughter's medical issues. I stopped providing care for 2 reasons. She stopped paying me, and she placed her 6-year-old son in a residential facility for behavioral issues. He was, and remains, fine. Story 2. I've been babysitting for a while. The craziest I've had so far was one in the first years of babysitting. The parents were pretty easygoing, but as I quickly found out, that wasn't really a good thing. They had 4 kids that I babysat once a week for about 5 hours. The second youngest, a girl, used to throw temper tantrums that I could mostly deal with. One day she jumped up on the counter and started dancing. I told her to get down because she could hurt herself. Of course, she didn't listen, fell, and sat down to cry on the counter. I made sure she was okay, and then asked her if she had to get off the counter. She refused, and when I asked her again, she threatened to pee on the counter if I didn't get her a snack that she wasn't supposed to have allergies. Of course I say no, and then she actually peed on the counter on purpose. I ended up making her help me clean it off, but geez, the parents didn't even think it was a big deal. Story 3. Babysat for the neighbor of a family friend. Seemingly a normal house as you walked in the front door. Go through to what would have been a normal family lounge. All 4 walls are covered floor to ceiling in tanks containing snakes, lizards, spiders, terrapins, fish. Go into the kitchen, more tanks. The kid I'm babysitting has 2 tanks in his room. There's tanks in the hallway upstairs. This house is basically a zoo. The guy is late for wherever he's meant to be going because he's trying to get me to hold a tarantula that hasn't eaten for a few days so may bite you. Yeah, no thanks. Longest 6 hours of my life, constantly thinking something was crawling on me. When he dropped me home, he told my dad he said I could play with his snake if I wanted to, but sadly I declined. He kept ringing me up and asking me to babysit again, but oh no, how unfortunate, I was always busy. Also, his kid was a little crap. Story 4. Being the youngest of all my cousins, and by youngest I mean they all had 1 to 3 children, and I was only 15. I was the go-to babysitter for all of them. During high school, I babysat at least 3 times a week. It was good money, but those kids could be a handful. Some nights were perfectly smooth, and I was usually paid well, so I didn't complain too much. My most challenging nights were always with the same set of children. 2 boys and a girl, all about 2 years apart. My cousin, their mom, had recently gone through a divorce and was definitely enjoying her newfound freedom. All these kids did the whole time I babysat them was argue and bicker, and trying to guide their behavior was nearly impossible. One time, shortly after Halloween, I arrived at their house so it could only be described as complete chaos. The kid's uncle had been watching them for a couple of hours before I got there and basically let them do whatever they wanted. There were candy wrappers everywhere, and they were running up and down the hallway. He couldn't have left fast enough when he saw me arrive. So now I'm left with a group of very energetic children. So I tried my best to get them to settle down and watch a movie, made some popcorn, and everything seemed to be going well. I even got them to bed with minimal fuss. Now my cousins were usually home a little after midnight, and that was never a problem for me. I would usually just relax on the couch and watch some TV until they got home. Well, this particular time, 1 o'clock passed, 2 o'clock passed, 3 o'clock passed, and I was getting pretty confused. So during this time, I've been intermittently falling asleep and waking up, just to be more confused by the fact that their mom wasn't home yet. Next thing I know, I'm being woken up by the 3 kids standing beside the couch, asking me to make them breakfast. It's now 8 a.m., and I've heard nothing from their mom. So I make them breakfast and then find out that their mom had been asleep on the other couch in the back room this whole time, and she wasn't feeling her best. Now fast forward a year or so, and I am babysitting these kids again. Basically, I went through the expected 4 hours of constant activity before bedtime. When it was time for bed, I got the boys to go down very easily, and now it was time for the girl. Well, she was having none of it. She resisted for at least 45 minutes. I would try to get her to go up the stairs to her room, and she wouldn't budge. So I tried carrying her, and she held on to anything she could along that stairwell and hallway. At one point, she grabbed the railing and wrapped her legs and arms around it, and slid all the way down the stairs like that. I was completely out of patience when all of a sudden she says, "Good night, I love you," and climbs into bed. So now that the bedtime struggle was over, I was looking forward to cleaning up and watching TV until Mom came home. Next thing I know, the oldest boy comes running out of his room and gets sick right outside his door. His entire stomach. I still don't understand how so much could have come out of this 7-year-old child. The mess was about 2 feet in diameter and was full of pizza. I felt bad for the poor kid because he obviously wasn't feeling well, but I knew there was no way I was going to be able to clean that up. I have a sensitive stomach. So I ended up calling their mom, which took like 4 calls to get her to pick up, and explained the situation, and she said she would be right home. Well, an hour later, she finally arrived. I apologized for interrupting her night and left as quickly as possible. I've had a bunch of other challenging moments, but those were by far the most difficult. Unruly children are the absolute worst to babysit. But hey, it was a great form of birth control. Story 5. I occasionally babysat a 5-year-old for a family friend. I've been watching him since he was 2, and he was usually well behaved. Then one day, he went to use the bathroom and stayed in there for quite a while. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I thought maybe he was being quiet, so I waited a bit longer. After a total of 10 minutes, I opened the unlocked door to find a wet, dark-furred animal and a mixture of strong smells rushing out and running through the house. The child was in there with a bottle of shampoo turned upside down in his hands. He had managed to open the child lock on the sink cabinet and had confined the cat in the bathtub. This seemed a bit mischievous, but not overly concerning, until I noticed the drain cleaner, nail polish remover, rubbing alcohol, hydrogen peroxide, and pretty much everything else in the cabinet was open. He was systematically going through everything in the cabinet and pouring it on the cat. I asked him why, and he said, in a very serious tone, "I'm trying to hurt it. I don't like that cat." I'm surprised the cat didn't make more noise or that it wasn't injured. I asked the child to stay in his room while I caught and cleaned the cat, which, surprisingly, seemed to enjoy getting back into the bathtub. When his mom came home, she mentioned it wasn't the first incident, but she apologized and gave me extra payment. The child also had a tendency to eat non-food items, so he would often be chewing on tree bark, his toys, his mom's shirts, or other unusual things. My family is still friends with them, and the child is now a completely normal college student. He did have a period of challenging behavior as a young child, though. Story 6. Let me tell you, this family was a whole production. Like, I walked into their house, and it was like stepping onto a movie set. They had this giant parrot that talked, and it was just like Polly want a cracker. This bird was dropping Shakespearean insults. The kids, they were running around in full superhero costumes, even at dinner. And the parents? They were like performance artists. Every conversation was a dramatic monologue, complete with hand gestures and sound effects. One night, they asked me to watch the kids while they went to some immersive theater experience. I was like, okay, sounds interesting. Then the kids started building a fort out of every blanket and pillow of the house, and the parrot was squawking, "Hark, villains approach." Then they started having a full-blown battle, complete with laser pointers and Nerf guns. At one point, the parrot swooped down and stole my phone. I swear, I thought I was losing my mind. The parents came home, covered in glitter and feathers, and they were like, "Wasn't that amazing?" I just nodded and ran out the door. Story 7. Their house was a stage, their lives a constant performance. They were a couple, artists in their own right, their relationship a canvas for their chaotic, passionate existence. The child, a bright, curious 5-year-old, was their muse, their collaborator, their audience. Every moment was a potential art project, every conversation a performance piece. One night, they asked me to watch their child while they hosted an interactive installation in their living room. The guests, a motley crew of artists and intellectuals, were encouraged to participate in a series of bizarre activities, including sculpting with raw vegetables and composing music with household appliances. The child, dressed in a sequined cape, moved among the guests, offering philosophical insights and distributing handmade origami. The atmosphere was electric, a whirlwind of creativity and unbridled energy. I watched, mesmerized, as the night unfolded, a surreal tableau of human expression. The parents, their faces flushed with excitement, moved among their guests, their laughter echoing through the house. It was a night of pure, unadulterated artistic madness. Story 8. I was a nanny for years for a great family. That's not who this story is about, though. This story is about my cousin, who vanished for about 4 years after dropping out of college. When he reappeared, He had a new partner and 3 kids. He needed a babysitter. Mine unvolunteered me. I was 16 and had a ton of experience by then, so why not? The kids were 5, 3, and 18 months. When I walked in, my cousin's partner pulled me aside and handed me a binder full of guidelines for her kids. They weren't allowed to watch Curio, Understandable, or Barney because of suggested messages, and they had to spend at least 45 minutes a day in what she called organized outdoor play. They also had to spend at least 45 minutes in organized learning activities. She used the word organized a lot. By now, you're picturing mom as an uptight type A supermom who is overly controlling of her kids. You're wrong. They lived in a single-wide trailer with about 10 dogs, and every inch of their house was cluttered, except the big master gaming PC in the corner. When I turned around to look at the kids, they were all partially dressed and disheveled at 1 p.m. Here's what I learned in the first hour. Baby was potty trained, 18 months, remember? 3-year-old had occasional digestive issues. Mom's solution was making her sit on the toilet for an hour a day. 5-year-old had some behavioral challenges and had been asked to leave several daycares. Mom had special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children, but not food assistance, and tried to save money by feeding her kids only cereal. Kids did not have beds, just mattresses on the floor. They all had lice. Organized outdoor play was when mom left them outside in their underwear so that she could focus on her virtual life. I should have quit at that point, but I persevered. They used me as a leave-in babysitter. After the first week, my clothes had a musty smell. My schedule would go like this. Mom and Dad would wake up at 4:30 a.m. to go to work. I stayed with the kids until 6:00 p.m., at which point, Mom and Dad would come home and put the kids to bed. Mom and Dad would then have disagreements until about 2 in the morning, keeping me up. During my first week, 5-year-old, let's call him the spirited child, locked me out of the house. During my second week, the spirited child pushed me down the porch steps. I got a mild head injury. In the same week, I discovered that Mom and Dad didn't have to be at work until 9. They were driving to a friend's house and sleeping. I was working over 12 hours for less than minimum wage at 16 with a head injury. I was being taken advantage of. I quit, and they made up a story about Mom having to ask me to leave because I was acting improperly, and the kids were upset. Many awkward family conversations were then had. Fast forward about 2 years. Grandma buys them a nice new house to raise kids in. Dad wanted no more kids, so Mom took matters into her own hands. Now, there are 4 children. Dad had the now 7-year-old sent to a residential program in another state, so racked down to 3. I am enjoying my teenage freedom one summer when I hear a noise outside my aunt's house. I open the door to find my cousin's 3 children sitting on the porch. My cousin had left them and gone to Washington to meet a girl he was dating online. We decided to take the kids back up to the house to give them back to Mom. I swear to whatever you believe and that I am not making this up. I heard Mom before I saw her. As we turned the corner, we heard a distant crying. When we drove up, Mom was on her knees in the front yard, expressing her distress. Neighbors came out to take a peek. I sat in the back of the van bewildered. 3 scared little faces watched their mother's display from the back seat. We later found out that the disagreement had started because Dad was online dating someone. Mom found this out by creating a fake online account and joining his group. Mom took Dad's PC onto their stagnant water pool and put it in. In the next week, Child Protective Services removed the kids from Mom. The house, well, it was not sanitary. The house was foreclosed on. Dad was spending the house payments on online games and other things. I assume animal control was called in. They had a large number of animals, and Dad stopped all contact with the family. He was later given custody of the kids. They now live in a 2-bedroom apartment. Also, we went to an amusement park once, and my cousin's partner had an incident for attention. Story 9. I didn't encounter anyone particularly challenging, but I did have one family with very amusing children. I went over aged 15 to meet the whole family before I started babysitting, and as soon as I walked into the room, the oldest boy, around 8, looked right at me and asked, "Have you learned about reproduction yet?" His mom was very apologetic and explained that he'd just been taught about it at school, and he continued to ask me personal questions about my relationships for the entire half hour or so that I was there. Another time, I had to reassure his little sister, around 3 or 4, that Mommy was coming home soon, and she nodded thoughtfully and said, "Mommy has gone for a drink." Pause. She's very thirsty. How sweet. I also babysat 4-year-old twins for a while. during which time their close friend of the same age passed away from an illness. I don't think I ever found out what it was. I ended up providing some informal emotional support to the toddlers for a while, which was a unique experience. Story 10. This family, they were obsessed with llamas. Like they had 5 llamas in their backyard. Yeah, llamas. So I'm watching the kids and they're like, "Wanna see our pets?" I'm thinking, okay, maybe a dog or a cat. No, it's a herd of llamas. And then they start dressing them up in tiny hats and sunglasses. And then they have a llama fashion show in their living room. With me as the judge, I'm not kidding. They were making them do little turns and poses. One of the llamas tried to eat my purse. The parents came home and they were like, "Oh, they're just getting their exercise." I was like, right, of course. I left a note saying, llamas are very fashionable. Theirs was a home where the boundaries of conventional behavior were fluid. They were a couple, their connection a raw, visceral energy that permeated every corner of their existence. The children, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around them, played with an innocent abandon, their laughter a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere. One evening, I was witness to a scene that blurred the lines between parental responsibility and personal expression. After the children were asleep, the parents retreated to their bedroom, the door left slightly ajar. What followed was a symphony of hushed whispers, soft moans, and the rhythmic creaking of the bed frame. It wasn't aggressive or violent, just intense. They were expressing a deep level of connection, a very personal way to communicate their bond. I quickly busied myself with tidying the living room, trying to maintain a semblance of professionalism. It was a reminder that even in the most seemingly ordinary households, the complexities of human relationships can unfold in unexpected ways. I left as the first rays of dawn painted the sky, the echoes of their intimacy lingering in the air. Story 11. I once babysitted for a family of 3, 2 transgendered parents and a Chinese kid. It was pretty normal until the kid wanted to play a game. He started to play Minecraft, and I watched a bit. All he did is murder rabbits for 2 hours. Parents came back hammered, sent the kid to their room, and started making out. Asked me if I wanted to join. Story 12. I was 12 and the family down the street asked me to babysit for their 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and infant. Keep in mind I am in 7th grade, and they want me to take care of 2 children and an infant, alone, in their house, for an evening. Kids are okay enough. They're a little bossy and bratty, but we watch The Sound of Music. They make me dance with them. The baby sleeps through the night. They go to bed okay. I only have to go upstairs a few times because I heard them talking. However, the parents were supposed to be home at 10, and it's 11:30. My mom calls the house and I say they're not home yet. I had school in the morning. She says give them another half hour, then call me back. They don't show, don't call, and it's midnight and I'm 12. Call mom back. She has to come over to sit with the kids so I can go home and go to bed. Apparently the parents rolled in drunk as heck around 3 a.m. I never babysat for them again. Story 13. I've only babysat once, and it was enough to convince me I'd never do it again. I was around 15 or 16 at the time, a bit shy but otherwise normal. My mom told me our neighbor's usual babysitter had canceled, and they'd asked if I could fill in. Being a teenager who was just starting to enjoy having some spending money, I readily agreed. It's important to mention that these neighbors were practicing members of a certain religious group, and while I have no issues with that, I knew their rules might be different from my own. I was told I'd be watching the neighbor's 2 sons, one older and one younger. I arrived at the house around 6 to find not just them, but also their 2 cousins, another boy and a girl who used a wheelchair. This wasn't a huge problem, they were all pretty well behaved, but it was definitely an unexpected start to the evening. Then things started to get a bit more complicated. The kids wanted to watch the new Puss in Boots movie and said it was okay to rent it. Long story short, we ended up renting a strange off-brand version that I found unsettling, even though the kids seemed fine with it. I was probably being overly cautious, so I had the kids turn it off and put on a children's channel instead. Around this time, the older boy disappeared in the bathroom. He was gone for about 2 hours, and I had to check on him twice to make sure he was all right. Since I was a teenage boy myself, I had a pretty good idea of what he was doing in there. But I had to knock and check anyway because having a kid disappear during your first time babysitting is very nerve-wracking. So I came back in after checking on him the first time, and things were pretty calm. They were watching a holiday special, everyone was relaxed, and I only had about an hour until the parents got home. My mom called to check on me, how sweet. I told her everything was fine, the kids were watching TV and so on. She then reminded me that, due to the kids' religious beliefs, It was forbidden for them to watch anything involving holiday themes, fantasy, etc. I looked up as she said this and realized that they were watching a holiday special that at that moment happened to be a parody of a fantasy series. Once again, the TV went off, and I nervously asked the kids if they were allowed to watch that. They said it was okay, that they weren't really paying attention, etc. I figured I'd dodged a bullet, but now I was really nervous, so I wanted to keep the TV off. But the kids all wanted something to watch, so we finally decided on another channel that seemed acceptable. Things went on for about an hour longer, and finally the time came for the parents to come home, 10:00 p.m. Nothing. An hour passed, still nothing. I was getting a little worried, and I just stayed with the kids. Finally, at about half past midnight, the family finally arrived home. I didn't realize it at the time, but they were all slightly inebriated, if not more so. The father of the family walked up, handed me $20, and asked if it was enough. I didn't want to be rude, but I really didn't think it was enough considering I'd been there about 2 hours longer than expected. I just said, and instantly, 3 other parents handed me the contents of their wallets. One especially so, offered me his car keys. I walked out with $53, which was a lot for me at the time. Never again. Story 14. I once babysat for a family with 2 young daughters. Apparently, when they put the girls to bed, they would consistently refuse to stay in their rooms. So the parents had switched the locks on their bedroom doors so they could be locked from the outside. When bedtime came, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I couldn't lock those children in their bedrooms. It felt very wrong. The whole experience was honestly quite upsetting for 13-year-old me. Had I been older and more knowledgeable, I likely would have considered contacting Child Protective Services. That seriously does not seem like a normal or healthy parenting decision. Story 15. I've been babysitting since I was a teenager, and I've encountered some energetic children, but Dylan was something else. His parents seemed perfectly normal, both working professionals, and they had a nice house. They also had 2 dogs and a cat with kittens, all of which I enjoyed. Dylan, however, was quite challenging. It was a summer babysitting job, so I had to watch him all day while his parents were at work. Here are a few of the things he did while I was there. He let the cat outside, even though she was nursing kittens and was an indoor cat. He had been explicitly told not to go into the room where she was, and was locked, but he used a screwdriver to open it. While I was outside looking for the cat, he locked me out of the house. He once told me he was going to take a bath. He was about 9, so it seemed reasonable. He locked his bedroom and bathroom doors. I didn't think anything of it until I heard glass breaking. Because he couldn't unlock any of the outside doors, he broke his bedroom window and ran out of the house. While he was outside in the neighborhood, he played a prank on neighbors by ringing doorbells and running away until I finally caught him. He was constantly bothering the dogs, being disrespectful, and hitting them, no matter what I said. Also, I definitely wasn't paid enough for that experience. I believe it was $20 a day. Story 16. One time the father of the family called me to a computer I had never used before in the basement. He accused me of accessing inappropriate sites on it, and said since his 2 sons said they didn't do it, it must be me. Yeah, okay, pal. Hope your 2 perfect cherubs remained pure. Story 17. I was babysitting for 2 young boys, ages 4 and 6, while their parents went out for the evening. The house was very cluttered, but the boys were generally well-behaved, a little lively as kids are. Everything was fine until the older boy was showing me pictures he'd taken on his camera. They were mostly silly faces and poses, but as he was scrolling, he suddenly said, "And I took a picture of my private area." I immediately said, "No," and took the camera away. That was enough pictures for me. No, I didn't see the picture, but I was concerned that it might be shown to the parents, and I would be held responsible. I never babysat for them again. Story 18. Alright, so this family, they were obsessed with conspiracy theories. Like, really obsessed. They had this whole wall covered in newspaper clippings and maps, with red string connecting everything. And the kids? They were totally in on it. They were telling me about how the government was controlling the weather, and how aliens were living among us. I was like, okay, cool story, kids. But then they started showing me evidence. They had this whole collection of blurry photos and grainy videos, all supposedly proving their theories. And then they took me to the backyard and showed me their alien detection system, which was basically a bunch of tin foil and wires stuck to a tree. The parents came home and they were like, "Any alien sightings?" I was like, "Just the ones on your wall." They just laughed and said, "You gotta keep an open mind." Story 19. Dude, this family was straight up wild. They had this whole underground bunker in their backyard, like a full-on survival shelter. And the kids, they were trained in all sorts of survival skills. They could build a fire with sticks, purify water, and even tie knots that I couldn't even pronounce. One night, they asked me to participate in a survival simulation. I was like, okay. So they blindfolded me and let me down into the bunker, and then they turned off all the lights. It was pitch black. And then they started making all these weird noises, like animal growls and wind howling. I was freaking out. And then they started throwing stuff at me, like pillows and stuffed animals. It was like a horror movie. The parents came home, and they were like, "How was the simulation?" I was like, "I think I'm traumatized." Story 20. A friend of mine provides childcare for this young boy regularly. It's quite demanding, but as a student, she appreciates the extra income. The parents are generally nice, but one issue might be that the dad often playfully teases his son, telling him imaginative stories and such. They'd always seem very relieved to have a break from their child for the evening. First noticeable thing about the boy is that he consistently wears the same outfit, a striped top and black shorts. Second is that he absolutely insists on bringing his stuffed animal, a cat or something similar, everywhere. Apparently he has conversations with this toy and even playful disagreements. He also attributes his misbehavior to the toy. Every time she watches him, there's some kind of unusual incident. He enjoys running around in a mask and cape. One time, he locked her out of the house. He even took her college notes once and threatened to dispose of them. She did mention one particularly enjoyable time when they'd played an imaginative game in the garden that he invented, so it's not all challenging, I suppose.
That's a wrap for this video. Make sure to leave your relatable story down in the comments. I would love to make a video on them. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.